Khora! Again. So, she has received her first batch of changes, and if you've been paying attention to the community tab posts, you probably know that this video is going to be a compare and contrast video. In other words, using bits of the video that I made last time, we're going to be taking a look at her old version and comparing it to the newest version. I had a few people asking me after the first Khora video went live, why didn't you just wait for her to change before you covered her? And, well, there were two reasons why I made the previous video on her. Number one, to give day one folk who tuned into the channel more info on how she worked at the time, and two, to have information to compare her to when she inevitably got changed. So now, I can just go back to the old Khora video and point out significant changes from that. So, you know, it's a good thing. And changed she has been. For the better, I might add. I didn't make it super clear last time, but my general opinion of Khora was this. Fun idea, varied kit, but needed a lot of work on execution. Khora is one of those frames that fails to fall into a specific specialization. She's in an odd space between being a jack of all trades and, well, another Titania. That is to say, a frame without much of a focus at all. Luckily, this has been rectified quite a bit. Granted, I'm still not sure what I would consider her bread and butter to be, but let's just go ahead and get into the bread and butter of this video, comparing and contrasting old and new Khora. And we'll start with Whipclaw. The most notable difference right off the bat is that it is considerably sped up, and the awkward delay between the animation and the hit actually coming out has been lessened. I failed to mention this the last time, but Whipclaw has this very weird animation desync from the actual attack coming out, where the whip would be extended for quite a while before the actual hit would come out. It was extremely jarring, but that problem has now quite obviously been toned down quite a bit. Additionally, it is no longer a gigantic pain in the ass to hit enemies that are hanging in Strangle Dome with it. Mostly because it now damages anything within Strangle Dome if you hit the dome itself. You can see here in the previous video that the damn whip had trouble hitting even one target, which was a massive problem because Khora is a mix between a damage dealer and a crowd controller. She needs her CC to boost the damage of her one in Venari. And while Venari still has a lot of issues regarding Strangle Dome, and trust me, we'll get into that, for Whipclaw it has been sorted out. So, jolly good. And another great thing, Whipclaw doesn't break ensnares now. And personally, I never really had an issue with it breaking ensnares because I just kind of figured that was the trade-off for it boosting the damage of her one. But you know what? I'm not complaining because this is what folk wanted, so this is a great change. And we're not done yet, because in addition, it now causes the ensnare target to go for another round of mob snatching if you hit them with Whipclaw. Though, there is one tiny problem. If the enemy dies, the ensnare disappears, and if it isn't already obvious, Whipclaw is extremely strong! What? Unless it's a heavy unit, be prepared for ensnares to disappear by the truckload. It becomes even harder to keep up when combined with Strangle Dome, since that also boosts the damage of Whipclaw. But honestly, this is mostly just a minor gripe, because a lot of other abilities in the game suffer this issue, and it's less of a core problem and more of just the nature of the beast. Now, moving on to Ensnare itself, it unfortunately still has the reduced duration on enemies that are snagged by the AoE chain. But on the plus side, it no longer has that weird delay where it has to wait a brief moment before snagging another enemy. It now works a lot more like Larva, if you remember that comparison in the first video. But it still isn't as extreme as what Larva is. And as before, Ensnare also boosts the damage of Venari. Now onto Venari herself, and this is where a lot of discussion is going to take place, since Venari is Khora's primary selling point. Starting off with the most obvious, she is now Khora's passive and is not summoned via her 3, which is awesome, but as a result, her 3 now feels kind of empty. But it is helped somewhat by being able to mark targets for Venari to prioritize. And thank God! They got rid of their initial idea to make it so the Venari could die permanently and you would have to eat a revive stone to bring her back. Now, she's simply on a respawn timer that you can bypass with an energy cost by pressing 3 when she's dead. And if you do decide to bypass the timer with an energy cost, the cost scales down as the respawn timer gets closer to 0. So, for an example, if you revive her as soon as she dies, you'll end up eating a lot more energy. And this is a much better alternative than the original idea, I might add. Also, the change in passive means that Khora no longer gets an armor buff when she's around pets, but personally, I didn't really care if it stayed or not, because armor typically has to be given to a frame by the truckloads to be worth it, and Khora was not going to be a frame who was going to be an armor tank. Instead, she now gets a speed boost, which makes a lot more sense because isn't she basically supposed to be Catwoman but with a beast summon? I gotta say, I don't really think of an armored knight in those regards. Now here's 2 changes that are super simple but have major effects. 1, Venari deals slash damage instead of impact now, and 2, Venari now benefits from strength mods on Khora. If you've been wondering why Venari now hurts so much, this is why. She went from needing sharpened claws to proc just to kill a level 80 Lancer, to being able to kill it without even needing to strip armor. Venari is now able to proc slash on her attacks, which will not only melt enemies, but it also synchronizes very well with Khora's Whip Claw if you have it built for viral and slash. It is a very good combination. Additionally, strength mods means that her heal is a lot stronger and the base damage of attack form is much higher. This is wonderful! I still have minor gripes, which I'll get into in a second, but for the most part, they've made extremely good changes to Venari's damage here. As mentioned earlier, Venari can now be commanded to either attack a specific target or heal a specific player, depending on what mode you're in. And this new function also has a change that is different from their initial idea. Instead of costing energy to switch between forms, it now costs energy to mark enemies. Makes a lot more sense, and dancing Khoras can now rejoice. Now, this is where we need to bring up an issue that still remains with Khora's design. Venari still gets stuck on things. Now, this is where we have to talk about something. This is unfortunately an extremely difficult thing to completely fix. Companion pathing in games is very difficult. Having a companion that follows the player and manages to path perfectly at all times to both him and the enemy is not often seen. There's usually shortcuts that are done to make them work, because developers have to keep in mind that players aren't going to be walking down their carefully placed roads all the time, where companions would rather stay. Often, the companion character has to go through terrain that it might not be accustomed to during dev testing. Warframe is no exception. Pet AI will get stuck, and it's something that we have to live with. However, it becomes very noticeable when you order Venari to attack something, spending energy to do so. Often Venari will just stand there or walk into a wall while you just spend energy for nothing. So, we're going to need a shortcut to prevent this, and it's honestly quite simple. Just have Venari teleport to the target that gets marked. This is not only a fix, but it also should be considered a bonus since marking a target right now doesn't boost the damage or the effect of Venari's attacks, it just gives the marked target priority. So I like to think of it as spending energy to make Venari teleport instantly to the target as a bonus, as well as a fix to a big issue. Luckily for us though, it seems that Steve understands that this is an issue. And while I don't know if he'll go through with the exact suggestion that I've thrown out here, it is good to know that they know that this is a problem that needs addressing. Most companion mods now also work on Venari, such as Animal Instinct, but unfortunately, Swipe and Sharpened Claws still do not work on Venari's special attacks. I'm not going to get into major detail as to why I think this should be a thing since I've already covered it in the last Khora video, but here's the short version. Venari's special attacks should be able to use Sharpened Claws for armor strip so that it won't feel as clunky or awkward. As it currently stands, Venari can only proc Sharpened Claws if she uses a normal attack, not a special attack. This is a problem because Venari tends to prioritize the special attack, which normally makes sense, but it conflicts with these two extremely important Kavat mods. Swipe also needs to work on the special attacks for both attack form and protect form. No one is going to think that it's worth it to spend energy disarming a single enemy, and the attack form special attack is lengthy and suffers a cooldown, unless you bypass the cooldown by commanding Venari yourself. Remember that this is a horde slaying game. Abilities that either deal damage or do crowd control in almost all cases need to be able to strike multiple enemies at once. So I'm going to leave it at that. Moving on. Last up is Strangle Dome, the ability that everyone wants to throw in the trash can for an exalted whip ability instead. Strangle Dome didn't get many changes, at least not directly, but it did get one major change that is more than welcomed. You know that long animation it used to have where it not only had to go through its 2-second animation, but also had a deploying phase before the dome would actually be active? Yeah, that's mostly gone now. Dome deployment is much faster and much more responsive. I did love the animation it did, but function over form. Other than that and the fact that it drops dead bodies now, not much about it changed. Which can be considered a problem since Venari still has issues with Strangle Dome. If an enemy is hanging from it at a decent height, she can't attack. This also happened previously. She'd only be able to hit targets that were bound to the ground, and even with this new update, if you mark an enemy that's hanging, she just won't attack a lot of the time. I've sent DE some suggestions on how to fix this, so I'm not going to bog down the video any more than it already is, but it is something that needs to be fixed. So, yeah, that's about it. It's likely that she's going to get another set of changes in the future, but I don't think I'll be making another video on them. This is probably going to be the last video on Khora, and this video along with the last video on her should give you the basic gist of her history and changes. And, you know, there's a lot to like about Khora, even if her ability kit remained terrible. I mean, she has an interesting design history dating back years ago. And not just visual-wise, we also have documented history on how